The idea of sourdough and bread baking can feel overwhelming. It certainly did for me when I first got started, but I have found that with time and practice, you can indeed become a confident sourdough baker and make delicious sourdough bread and other sourdough recipes on a regular basis for yourself and for your family. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are talking all about sourdough. If you are new here, my name is Marissa. I am a pharmacist and health coach, and I am very passionate about healthy eating and helping others learn how to eat healthy and improve their health. This year, I am tackling the area of sourdough and bread baking. I love bread. It's one of my favorite foods ever. And unfortunately, the vast majority of bread that you are going to find at the grocery store contains a lengthy ingredient list of preservatives, excess gluten, flours depleted of their natural nutrients, highly processed sugars, vegetable seed oils, and maybe even soy. Finding healthier bread that does not contain these additive ingredients is very challenging, and if you are able to find it, then it can be very expensive, which makes it hard to buy continually, especially if you have a large family that you are trying to feed. So because of all of that, I personally decided that I was going to start making it myself, and I brought you all along with me on this journey. I have been filming each step of the way, and as you can clearly see in those videos, I definitely did feel overwhelmed by the entire process and the whole idea of it. So if you are overwhelmed and nervous right now about this, then I totally get it. But after a lot of trial and error, I feel that I have built up some confidence with it, and I want to share with you guys what I have learned thus far to help you get started with it as well. I promise you that once you get your mind wrapped around sourdough, it's not as complicated as you currently think that it is, which is great because that makes it doable and attainable, two things that we very much need in order to make healthy eating a habit. And lastly, I am no professional. I am not trying to be a professional. I simply just want to bake some nourishing bread for myself and for my friends and family. And even though my bread doesn't always come out perfectly, it still tastes good. And at the end of the day, that's what matters most to me. So if I can do this, then so can you. So we're going to talk about what is sourdough. I'm going to walk you through how to make a sourdough starter, how to feed, maintain, and store that starter, and answer the question of what is sourdough discard. There is a lot of information in this video, and each section is time-stamped, so please feel free to jump to the section that you need help with, and you can basically consider this to be your ultimate beginner's guide to getting started with sourdough. So what is sourdough? Sourdough is a fermented food in which you utilize a starter to make naturally leavened bread and other baked goods. A sourdough starter is a mixture of flour and water that captures wild yeast and bacteria from your environment. You can consider your starter as a living thing that requires continual care. So the way that it works is this. You have a jar of flour and water. Yeast and bacteria in the air get incorporated into your flour and water mixture. The yeast in the starter feeds on the flour, so the flour is its food source, and it creates the byproducts carbon dioxide and ethanol. Now the bacteria present, which is lactobacilli, feeds on that ethanol and it creates lactic acid. The carbon dioxide created by these creates pockets in the starter that cause it to rise, and the lactic acid created by the lactobacilli helps keep other unwanted organisms away, so it's acting as a preservative. So the yeast and the lactobacilli have a very symbiotic relationship where they both work together to create our starter and delicious sourdough fermented breads. When you have a sourdough starter, you are going to be using this instead of using yeast that you can buy at the grocery store. Now let's talk about how to make a sourdough starter. If you are feeling overwhelmed right now with the thought of this, do not worry, you are not alone. I 100% felt the exact same way when I was first getting started. Actually, the first time I tried to make a starter was back in January of this year, and it was a total fail. I filmed the whole thing. It didn't work out, and I ended up throwing out the footage and the starter because it didn't work. And then a few months later, I had two different people give me some starter, and I started to use those to start practice cooking with sourdough. Sadly, one of them did not make it, but the other one survived. So that one is this right here. This is now my whole wheat sourdough starter. And then in the spring, when I was gearing up for this whole sourdough journey for the channel, I wanted to show you guys a step-by-step tutorial on how to make one in case that is something that you really wanted to do. So I ended up making another starter, and that one is this right here. The whole video series on how I made the sourdough starter is posted on my YouTube shorts, and I walk you through day by day how to make this, and all of those videos are going to be linked in the description box. So if you would like to watch me make the starter on every single day, then you can go ahead and watch that video series. But right now I'm going to talk you guys through the process. So first up, you need to have all of your supplies. When I first did this, I did it very simply, which is some stuff that I have on hand. So you need a mason jar, you need a coffee filter, you wanna have a cover that protects the starter from dust, or if you have like a fruit fly in the house or whatever, you wanna protect the starter from any of that, but you also wanna make sure that it is breathable. You do not want anything airtight. So a nice breathable cover, you can use a coffee filter, most people have that on hand. You can also use a rubber band to secure the coffee filter in place. You can use a wooden stick or a spoon that will fit. This is like a mini one. You can go ahead and stir that up. You can also use a silicone stirring stick. Next, you need some ceramic or silicone dry measuring cups. These right here are some Christmas ones that I bought a while back, I believe at Walmart, because they were just so cute. And I just keep using them all year long. It works. I have them. Why not? You also need a liquid measuring cup, some unbleached all-purpose flour, and some purified filtered drinking water. Unbleached flour and filtered water are very important here because bleached flour and chlorinated water can kill your starter. Also, you want to avoid using metal. So no metal spoons, knives, forks, nothing to stir your starter because that can negatively affect your starter as well. The next thing is optional, and that is a digital food scale. You would use this to measure everything out in grams, and you'll see many recipes listed out this way for just sourdough breads or even just for sourdough starters. However, for me, I found it way easier and simpler to not use this, but it's totally up to you. You may want to have this on hand just because, like I said, some recipes only list out ingredient measurements in grams. So depending on like what recipe book you get or what recipes online you're following. But in my opinion, you don't really need this to make a starter. But again, totally up to you. So most of you will probably have these ingredients on hand, like the mason jar, the coffee filter, the rubber band, the wooden spoon. So you probably have these on hand, and it's a great way to get started. That's what I used when I first made my starter. But I also wanted to mention that you can get a sourdough starter kit. I got one from T-Mars and I absolutely love it. And even if you just start off the other way, I highly recommend getting this at some point just because it just comes with a lot of basics that you need to make bread and do all your different recipes. And it also just kind of helps you like with tracking. So the starter kit comes with this really nice large jar here. This is the other one that I had. So just as like a nice comparison here, this one is a lot smaller in size. And so when I feed it, I can't really feed the starter too much. So I can't really make a lot of recipes all at once. This one, I can feed it more and it has room to grow because when you feed your starter, it's going to double in size. So if you like have it here and then it goes up, it could potentially like push the coffee filter up and like overflow. And that definitely did happen to me a couple of times. And then it just kind of gets messy. And then when you put the coffee filter back on, sometimes it can like stick and then it rips. It's just like not as, user friendly. So I like that this is a much larger jar. Also, I don't use coffee filters. I have this little like breathable cloth cover. Think of it like a shower cap, but for your sourdough starter here. So this is what it looks like, and you just go ahead and put it over the top and it just fits right on. You don't need to use a rubber band. It kind of takes care of the problem for you and it works out much better. You also get this temperature gauge. It comes with like a Fahrenheit one and a Celsius one, and they have both on here, but one is more larger in size than the other. Whatever it is that you prefer to use, depending on where you're located. But it's really great because it kind of shows you like the temperature of the starter and it helps you kind of gauge where everything's at. Temperature is really important when it comes to sourdough and sourdough starters that I learned along the way. So it helps you kind of gauge the temperature. Usually sourdough starters love like 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you also get this band here, which I really like, and it kind of helps you measure like the day, the time, like that you're working on your sourdough starter, so you can kind of just keep it all in track in your mind. And then what's nice is that like right here is where my sourdough is. So if I was to feed it, I'd probably have the rubber band here, and then I can track like when it has doubled in size. Whereas with this one, I would maybe have to either just remember, put a rubber band around it, or like mark it with a Sharpie. So I don't really like to mark it with a Sharpie. I did that once, but then it's like always there, and then it like messes up like future measurements and stuff. So this is great because you can kind of move it all around, and it just makes it a lot more convenient. It also comes with a silicone stirring stick. I find that this is very sturdy, and it works really well to mix the starter together, to mix that water and flour until it's well combined. You do need to mix it well because you're trying to incorporate air into the starter, because again, we're trying to capture that yeast and bacteria from the air, and that's how we make our starter, right? So it's really like sturdy, and it like holds up well. You also get a silicone brush here. I have been using this for egg washes. I just put this on top of the dough right before I bake it, and it helps it get nice and brown in the oven. And so it comes with this, which I find helpful. It also comes with this metal scraper, which is so handy when you are trying to cut dough, or you're trying to like pick it up to like put it into your baking pan, or if you're like, you know, working on your cutting board and it starts to stick. This is so helpful to just like facilitate, you know, movement of the dough. And it's a nice like large like metal scraper, and has a nice handle and nice grip. It works out really well. You also get a bread trimming knife that you can use to score sourdough bread. So when you see all those like beautiful designs on like the round sourdough breads, that's how they're doing it, with something like this. And you get a couple different blades in here. And you also get 2 proofing baskets. This one would be really good for loaf breads, and this one would be good for round breads. If you have no idea what proofing is, which I didn't, so don't worry. With proofing, essentially it's where, or especially with sourdough, you let the bread dough ferment overnight or for several hours, and then you go ahead and you shape it. And then you have to let it rise for like another 2 to 4 hours before you bake it. And so you can allow it to do that in a proofing basket. So that's what these would be good for. I also like the fact that these are silicone, and they are very easy to clean. And with silicone, very little like ever sticks to it. So it's great. You don't have to worry about that. And what's awesome about these is that they actually fold in. So it makes it super easy for storage, because otherwise you have to like figure out how you're gonna store these like big baskets. And this is what the other one looks like. And again, you just stack them, put it in your cabinet, and very easy for storage. I will link that sourdough starter kit down below, and I also have a discount code that you guys can use to get 10% off of your order. And if you think at some point that you are going to be making a lot of sourdough breads and products, and you need to have a lot more starter than this will allow you, or this will allow you, then I wanted to share that there is this other large glass jar that you can get, and you can really house a lot of starter in here. Initially, I just had my starter in here, and then like I said, it was overflowing, so it just wasn't big enough. So I ended up transferring that starter into here, and I primarily used this for a little while. And then when I got my sourdough starter kit, I have like this right here for my starter, and then I have this right here for my starter. So this is an all-purpose flour starter, and this is a whole wheat flour starter, and I wanted to have both. I liked having both, and so I have like 2 different starters. So for me, I kind of just have not been using this right now, but if I ever wanted to make a lot of sourdough starter, then I would go ahead and transfer it over to this. Something really key to point out is that it has a lid, but it's not airtight. So it works very well for your starter, because again, we don't want anything airtight. So now that you know what tools you need in order to make your starter, we can talk about actually how to make your sourdough starter. So a starter takes about 7 days to make. That's really more of an estimate. Could take you less days, could take you some more days, really just depends. But 7 days is a good estimate to keep in mind. So on day 1, you're going to add a half a cup of your unbleached all-purpose flour and a half a cup of purified drinking water into your mason jar. You're going to stir this really well, again, with either a wooden spoon or your silicone stirring stick, because no metal, okay, no metal. Stir that really well, get a lot of air incorporated in there. Then you're going to place on the coffee filter and rubber band or the breathable cloth cover, and you're going to leave this out at room temperature in a warm spot out of direct sunlight. I like to leave mine on my kitchen counter, and it works really well. On day 2, you're going to add in another half a cup of unbleached all-purpose flour and a half a cup of purified drinking water. Stir it again and make sure it's really well combined, and then you're going to cover it and leave it out on the counter at room temperature. Then on day 3, you're going to start discarding, which is where you start taking some of the starter out before you feed it more flour and water. If you see any water that is sitting at the top because it has separated from the flour overnight, then you're just going to stir that until it's well combined, and then you're going to remove a half a cup of the starter. And that right there is your discard. The starter that you discard is not ready for bread recipes yet, so you can either throw it away or you can use it as compost and put it in your yard. Then you're going to go ahead and feed your starter with another half a cup of flour and water, stir it together, put the cover back on, and leave it out on your counter at room temperature. Then on days 4 through 6, you're going to repeat what you did on day 3. So discard half and then feed it again with a half a cup of flour and a half a cup of water. You're going to stir it well, put the cover back on, and leave it out on your counter at room temperature. Then on day 7, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to discard half, then you're going to feed it again with a half a cup of flour and a half a cup of water. And then you're going to check it in about like 4 hours, and you're going to see if at that point your starter has doubled in size. If it has, then you are good to go to start using it in your recipes. If your starter is ready to go, then do not wait too long to use it because you don't want it to start falling. You want to use it when it is peaking. Now, if your starter hasn't doubled in size, then it is not ready, and you're going to keep going with the same process until it does. So it may take you 8 days or 10 days. Again, that 7-day mark is more of an estimate, but you really should start seeing some bubbles along the way, and you can kind of gauge it as you go along. Now, a couple of tips to help you out. If you find that your starter is really runny, then you can decrease how much water you add in by a little bit. I'm not giving an exact measurement here because everyone's home is a little bit different in terms of temperature and humidity levels. So you may have to play around with it a little bit. Temperature and humidity play a huge role, as I have found out, with your sourdough starter and your sourdough recipes. So essentially, you want to aim for a thicker pancake batter consistency. My next tip is if you see a black liquid on top of the flour the next day and your starter smells kind of like alcohol or acetone, that's okay. It's called hooch, and it just means that your starter needs to be fed with more flour and water. So just drain that liquid off, and then you can go ahead and feed your starter. You should not see mold. If you see mold, personally, I would just throw the whole thing away and start over. My next tip is to remember that temperature is important. So starters like 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. If your house is fairly warm, it will be easier for you to make a starter. I think the reason why my first attempt to make a starter failed was because I made it in January and my house was like 68, 69 degrees. And I think it was just too cold for the starter to become a active healthy starter. And then when I made it again in the spring, my house was like 70 to 80 degrees and my starter was much happier. It was very easy. The series that you can watch, my 7-day series on how to make a starter, was my attempt, and I was doing it day by day. So if it didn't work, then I would have had to come out and tell everybody it didn't work. So I was making that in real time and I was posting it like the day after making it. So it worked out. That was a good temperature time to do it. So if you are thinking right now, if you're watching this video in real time, it's summer. This right now is a perfect time to make your starter. However, that being said, if it is colder outside when you are trying to make your starter, that's okay. You could try warming up your water a little bit, but just make sure to check the temperature before you add it into your starter. This is the thermometer that I have on hand that I have been using. If the water is too hot, you could kill your starter. So I would aim for about 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Lastly, if you don't want to make a starter, that's okay. You can buy a sourdough starter. You can buy them active or dehydrated. If you get the dehydrated one, then you do need to rehydrate it. Or you can even ask someone that you know who is already making sourdough products, has a sourdough starter, and they can give you some of theirs. Now let's talk about how to feed, maintain, and store your starter. As I mentioned previously, I usually don't weigh my ingredients in grams. If you want to, you totally can. You just need a food scale that measures in grams. The one I have does, and I'll link it down below. Essentially, what I do, because I don't really do that often, is I just look and see how much starter I will need to make a recipe. And whatever the recipe says is how much flour I add into my starter. So if I need a half a cup of starter for my recipe, then I will add in a half a cup of flour. If I need 1 cup of starter, then I will add in 1 cup of flour. Then I pour in enough water to get an overly thick pancake batter consistency. Just add in a little bit at a time, keep stirring it as you go, and you'll get a feel for it. Personally, I like doing it this way. In my opinion, it is a lot easier, and it also helped me learn how to be more intuitive with this whole process instead of relying on what a recipe calls for. Again, temperature and humidity do play a big role when it comes to sourdough. So I just kind of figured that I just wanted to learn how to do this a bit more intuitively so that I am ready come, any time of year. Then once your starter is active and bubbly, you can use what you need for your recipe. But always, always, always make sure that you leave some starter left behind in the jar. If you use all of your starter that is in here, then you have to go through the entire 7-day process of making a starter again, and we don't want to do that. So always make sure to leave some left behind. Once you have used your starter for a recipe, now the question is, what do you do with it? So if you are planning on cooking something else within the day that requires your starter, then go ahead and feed it again. But if you are not planning on using it again that day, then you can go ahead, cover it with your breathable cloth cover, the coffee filter, and place it in your refrigerator. Putting it in the fridge puts this sourdough starter on pause. And then when you want to use it again, you simply just take it out and feed it just as I explained previously. And I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I'm going to mention it one more time just because it's so important. Every time you cover your starter, to store it, to leave it on the counter, whatever, it has to be with something that is breathable. So you either have the coffee filter, the breathable cloth cover, or you have the lid that does not have the airtight seal. You need your starter to be able to breathe, so you do not want anything that has an airtight seal. Next, I want to mention what the difference is between active sourdough starter and sourdough discard. I've already started to talk a bit about it, but I just want to clearly define that here. When I first got started, I was very confused by this, but it's actually quite simple. Active starter is starter that has been fed, has doubled in size, and is nice and bubbly. Discard, on the other hand, is starter that is removed from the jar before you feed it more flour and water. So for example, these starters right here, they are not active. I just took these out of the refrigerator so I could show you guys for this video. I have not fed them. They are very much like down here. The stuff on the side is just starter that has dried up, and I probably just need to clean the jar, but my starter is right there. If I was to feed it, I'd feed it flour and water, let it rise, and then once it's has risen, I can go ahead and take some out for my recipe. And then that's it. But at this particular moment, I haven't fed it. It's been in the refrigerator for the last couple days here. So if I was to take something out of it right now, before adding flour and water into it, that is known as discard. Discard can be used in recipes. You can actually look up sourdough discard recipes on Google, YouTube, or Pinterest, and you will find several of them. The only time that I personally haven't used discard in recipes is when I first made my sourdough starter. I use that as compost in my yard, but now that I have a mature starter, I never throw out discard. I always use it in some way. I'm gonna share with you guys a quick example of all of this in action. So I'm going to make some sourdough pancakes. It's this very simple, easy recipe, and it's a same day sourdough recipe too. So I'm going to share with you that so you kind of get like a feel for this. So right now my starter is in the refrigerator. I'm going to pull that out and we're gonna go ahead and feed it. When I am not using my starter, it is in my refrigerator. I don't use it every single day. This is what it currently looks like. So for my pancake recipe, I need 1 cup of sourdough starter. So I'm going to feed it 1 cup of this unbleached all-purpose flour. And now I'm gonna add in some of my purified drinking water, and I usually just add in a little bit at a time. And then I take the silicone stirring stick and start to stir it. Once I'm done mixing, I like to just scrape down the sides. Makes it easier to track when it's doubled. Okay, so my starter has been fed right there. So I'm gonna put the band there and we're gonna see, it's probably gonna double all the way to the top, but let's see what we can do. So put the cloth on it. I'm gonna leave it here on the counter and we're gonna check it in like 4 hours. So I fed my starter at about 2 p.m. and now it is about 6 p.m. So it's been about 4 hours and this is the starter. It definitely doubled in size. It's literally right up here. This is what my starter looks like and we are ready to go. I already put the rest of my ingredients in the bowl, so now all we have to do is add in our starter. So we need 1 cup of our starter. It'll be okay. And they are all done and they look incredible. So pancakes are done and now what I'm gonna do is put the cover back on the starter because I am done using it for the day and I'm going to place this back in the refrigerator until I am ready to use it again. All right, so that was a lot of information. Please feel free to return it back to this video whenever you need to. I have linked a bunch of stuff in the description box, including the sourdough starter kit, the large glass jar, the digital food scale, my thermometer, my 7-day series on how to make a sourdough starter if you actually want to see it in real time. If you're more of a visual learner, I know I definitely am, along with my whole sourdough video series playlist. Every time I make a new sourdough recipe, I am filming it and sharing it with all of you. I use my starter for many things, including bread, pancakes, muffins, dinner skillets, zucchini fritters, pizza dough, English muffins, flatbread, and I feel like I am just getting started. There are so many recipes out there and I can't wait to keep trying them. And I just wanted to say that this has been really fun despite feeling overwhelmed or confused at times. I've really enjoyed the process of learning how to do this, and the end result has always tasted delicious for the most part, except for like maybe 1 or 2 tries in the very beginning. But ever since then, like everything has tasted really good, even if it didn't look like 100% perfect. And again, at the end of the day, I want this to taste good. And the more that I practice, the better I get, the prettier it looks, all the things. So don't give up on it. Have some fun. It's a little confusing at times, but again, don't give up. It's really fun. It's a great expression of creativity. And it's also a good way to handle like stress, because like if you really wanted to knead bread by hand, it's just like something that you can do to like work out stress in your life. And also it's a really great way to learn how to practice patience. Bread is a patience game, especially sourdough. You are not going to hurry up this process no matter what you can do. It takes as long as it takes, and that's a really good lesson sometimes, because I don't know about you, but patience is not one of my strengths. So I have found this to be helpful for that as well. I have included some of my favorite recipes that I have made thus far in the description box, but if you want to see and follow in real time which recipes that I am using and loving, I have linked them all on my Pinterest page, and I continue to do so, so definitely go ahead and check that out. And if you haven't subscribed yet to my channel, then I would absolutely love for you to do so. I share healthy recipes, meal ideas, lots of fun stuff on sourdough, and ways for you to improve your health every single week. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please like it, share it with someone who is getting started on their sourdough journey, and comment down below. I would love to hear where you're at with sourdough, what your thoughts are on it, or any questions that you may have. So thanks again, and I will see you in the next video. Stay well, my friends. Bye.